Wendy is here. Wendy will be giving a keynote. Now, Wendy herself, she has quite some experience in IT and in the security field. CISO, public, private companies. Currently research director at 1Password. And yeah, well, listed as power player in the Hall of Fame. Wendy here. Yeah, well. Now, I'm very curious. When do we get to play on easy mode? I'm really looking forward to this. So, Wendy, join the floor, and thank you.
Thank you. Bonjour, good morning. Hello, everyone. I am so happy to be here. I've always wanted to come to BruCON, and so thank you all for the opportunity to be here. The answer to, if you want the TLDR so that you don't have to stay, the answer is we don't ever get to play on easy mode. So, sorry, there we go. But I am going to talk about what makes it so hard. Why is it still so hard? I've been in security for 30 years now, and it just doesn't seem to be getting any easier. And you would think we would have figured this out by now, but why not? So I took part in a committee for the U.S. National Academy of Sciences, Engineering, and Medicine to try to list all the hard problems in security. And the last time they tried to do a list of hard problems in security was in 2006. Now, can you imagine, can you guess what problems were on that list 10 years ago? Here was the list from 2005. Does any of this look familiar to you? Identity management was hard, insider threat, time-critical systems, information provenance, all of that, security and privacy, security metrics. These were all hard problems 10 years ago. So what did we have again this year? Well, first of all, we started with all of those on the committee, and then we added about 50 more, and then we had to cut it back. So it's gotten harder because there's more complexity. There's still the old technologies out there. There are still mainframes being used quite successfully because they work just fine. There are lots of wider use cases. It used to be that only IT people were using this technology, and now consumers, everybody is using them. My kids are using them. My neighbors, doctors, farmers, artists, everyone. There are the ripple effects of breaches now. It used to be that if you had a breach, it affected only your organization, and now that isn't the case anymore. Ransomware and other extortion has gotten worse, and the monetization of data, not just for attacks, but for selling that data. All of that monetization of data has grown. And of course, cyber attacks have turned into ones that create kinetic effects. And worse, if you're in the biohacking village, you know what this is like now. So I'll let you look at the list. This is just part of the list. For what we added in 2025, things like secure composition, understanding what, now that programs are not necessarily just written from scratch, they're assembled from whatever you're finding, from open source, from, Stack Overflow, from every place. Any place you can, and now, of course, vibe coding. Whatever your AI writes for you, you're trying to put into software. The supply chain is now much bigger. It's a much bigger thing. It's many more levels deep. And there is policy establishing economic incentives. That's a big problem. As I mentioned before, the monetization of data, there are economic incentives to do things a certain way. The rest of the list includes things like social media and disinformation, This was not as much of an issue 10 years ago. And of course, AI, you can't have a talk and not say AI, I'm sorry. But a lot of these things are the same. The human system interactions, operational security is still a really hard problem. These are all the problems that we were asked by the White House to list. Things that could use either more legislation to help fix, or more research would be needed, or in any case, more economic support, more funding to research and solve these problems. 10 years ago, they were more theoretical problems, more academic problems, but now, these have real-world consequences. So we published this report back in May, and it's out there. It's free for anyone who wants to look at it, but you're not going to find anything surprising in it, I'm sure. But the big problem is we're still doing the same things to try to solve them. Like, is this really the year of X509 again? It has been the year of certificates over and over and over again. Awareness training, yeah, I'm sorry, Elise. I'm going to say things about awareness training. There's more security spackle. I don't know if you know what spackle means. It's what you put over, what you put over breaks in concrete or in drywall to fill in the holes. And security is being built by non-practitioners, and we kind of tend to say to everybody, sorry, you're on your own. You have to secure yourself. We're not going to do it for you. Yeah, sorry, this is how I look at awareness training. The whole internet is built to be clicked on. Why are we trying to tell people that they should not click on things? Or we try to teach them a dynamic list of what they should be spotting to tell if they should not be clicking on something. This is kind of like trying to install a dynamic block list into the poetry-generated custard in our heads. Why did we think this would work? Why did we think this is a good idea? We know how well this sort of thing, block lists do not work all that well. They always have to be expanded. And if you're teaching people who come and go in an enterprise, in an organization, and you're trying to get them to memorize all these different things they have to look for to tell whether they should click on something, I mean, HR has to open attachments all the time. So does accounting. So for awareness training, and I'll tell you a story about what I dealt with in awareness training. When I was a CISO, at one organization, we did about 25 different awareness training classes, and they were optional. They were not mandatory. You didn't have to go to them, but people came to them because we tried to be entertaining, and we kept a list of everyone who came to these trainings. Then we decided to do a phishing exercise to see who would fall for it, if people who did the training were less likely to fall for the phishing. It turns out that the people who did more of the trainings were more likely to fall for the phishing. Why? The only thing I can think of is that the people who came to the training really enjoyed the trainings, they wanted to be helpful, and the phishing exercise said, we need your help to make sure your password is strong enough. Please type it into this site over here. And so they said, oh, of course, we want to help, and they did that. So yeah, I think it's a losing proposition. I think it would be much better if we designed systems so that it didn't matter if you clicked on the wrong link. But, maybe that's just me. I also hate this saying that users are the weakest link. I don't think users are the weakest link. First of all, we're relying on them as the front line of defense when we shouldn't be. They shouldn't have to be defense for us. And also, users can be your greatest asset. When I was a CISO, it was great when somebody came into my office and closed the door and said, I think there's something you should know. They are a great source of threat intelligence. So users are not the weakest link. They're our best asset. Now, security spackle, just kind of papering over everything. I think that if I could go back in time, I would stop the person who invented antivirus, because they said, oh, you know, there's a vulnerability in this software and a virus is attacking it, so let's write a separate bit of software to protect against it, not fix the actual vulnerability. And ever since then, it's been one layer of spackle over another, adding more things. Let's add this to secure this. Oh wait, that has vulnerability, so let's virtually patch this. Let's do this. Let's route this through this and try to catch it before it does this. You know, I don't know how many layers deep it is now, but I can bet you in another 10 years, 15 years, it's going to be even more, because we have built a multi-billion-dollar industry off of writing separate tools to secure software instead of fixing the software. Another problem is that there are many of you, and I apologize if this is how you make your living, but doing vulnerability management is not the same as doing defense. I'm sorry, it's just not. It is pointing out somebody else's problem. It's going, ooh, you missed a spot right there. Yes, it is useful to have somebody finding these things, but it's also a lot harder to write it securely to begin with, or to figure out how to fix something that you can't really fix in production. There are lots of reasons why you can't fix something. If you are doing defense and you discover a problem, if you start pulling on a thread to figure out how it got that way, you end up finding something that seemed like a good idea at the time. And it probably was a good idea. It's just not anymore. So I would encourage a lot of you, if you have spent all your time finding somebody else's problems, try to come over to the other side. Come over to the blue team and see how hard it is, because I've been working in that area my whole career, and it's really annoying to hear researchers going, oh, why don't they just patch? I can't believe they're not patching. They're so stupid. They're so lazy. No, they're not. This is much, much harder than it looks. So saying things like just patch faster, what if you cannot patch? You see these wonderful yellow systems right over here? I think there are a couple over in the village, in the retro computing area. When things were made of the kind of plastic that turned yellow over time, you can see how old these are. These belong to my late husband. And yes, they were that color. We've had them that long. There are some things that you just can't patch. And in fact, one of the largest areas of attack these days are end of sale and end of life edge devices, routers, and so on. Because a lot of small organizations are not going to replace these. They work just fine. The only problem is they're not being patched for vulnerabilities. And so that's where nation-state threat actors, I'm not going to name any names, spend a lot of time now going through the edge devices and taking those over, because they're not patched. They're never going to be patched. The organizations can't afford the capital outlay to swap them out. This is a really big problem that we cannot get to. When I had a CT scan, for those of you who went to the biohacking village, when I had a CT scan, I asked the technician, how often do you patch these things? And he said, well, these are so old, this is 10 years old, we can't even fit functional patches in it anymore, much less security patches. So, you know, and they're not going to get rid of that CT scanner because it cost $1 million or more. They're going to keep it for as long as they can until they absolutely have to pay another $1 million or $2 million to get a new one. So there are these problems everywhere outside in the real world. Has anybody seen an ATM that is still running Windows 95? Yeah. It would cost way too much to go and replace hundreds of thousands, millions of these things. And they work fine. So, why would you change them out? Another problem that they have is a lot of security is built by people who are not practitioners. There's a lot of investment going on in the security field by the investment community who is focused on getting their money back. They're interested in what's going to sell as opposed to what's going to work. This economic incentive is making it harder for us to build tools to help with security. So, who here knows what this is? Anybody seen these before? In German, this is called a Latthammer. I don't know what it's called here in Belgium. This used to belong to my German father-in-law. It's very heavy, very strong. I don't know how many decades he had it before it came to me. This is used for, first of all, for tiling roofs. If you are tiling slate and you're cutting off the edges, you can use this part to do that, or you can use this part to make a hole for a nail to go in when you're doing the roofing. But you can also use this for woodworking when you're a carpenter. The problem is that if you work in building security products, you can be really good at building hammers, but if you've never been a carpenter, you don't understand a lot of the ways that this is going to be used. I watched a lot of German YouTube videos about carpenters rating the different brands of Latthammer to see how, to see what was good about it and what made a difference to them. All sorts of ways that they use this that you wouldn't understand if you're not a carpenter. For example, the grip needs to be a certain material because it has to be grippable when it's wet. Not just when you're sweating, but if you're working in the rain. The head here is square so that you can fit it into the corner of two boards and hammer in there. The surface is textured so that the head of the nail doesn't slip as much. There is a little channel right here in newer hammers. They have a magnet as well, so that if you're working with one hand, you can put the nail in here, hold it, set it, and then hammer it in. So that they use this for that. If you are working with a hammer all day, you're going to miss a lot. And when you miss and you hit right there, you need the neck to be very, very strong so that the head doesn't go flying off. So all of these things you need to know. Also, this thing, if you're working with wood, you can use it, again, if you're only working with one hand and you're holding something, you can grab the next board with the spike here. And also I learned that if you set it into a board and leave it, it's a sign for you're going to take a break and go have a beer. So everybody knows this. This is Feierabend. It is time to go have a beer. So all these things you're not going to understand about security unless you've actually defended an organization. So that's the problem with a lot of the products that we see out there. They were not built for what defenders have to do. And then speaking of what's going to work, do we even know what's going to work? I'm going to argue that we don't know what actually works in security. Now, if you want to argue with me, please do, because I love a good knockdown, drag-out keynote. We can go argue outside afterwards. But I don't think we know what works in security. We know what everyone is doing, but we don't know if it works. I hate peer benchmarking. That's the kind of report that we see. What are people spending? What are people doing? How do we know if that even works? What if your peers are really bad at security? That's not going to help you decide what you need to do. We need to know what's effective. So I did some research on this when I was an analyst, and I went around and asked a bunch of professionals. I said, okay, I'm a CISO. It's my first day on the job. We've never done security before. It's a 1,000 person enterprise. What should I buy? Just that. What should I buy? And I got so many different answers from all of these professionals. Some people named 4 different technologies that were the absolute minimum baseline that you needed. Some people named 31 that you needed, and you can imagine that the people who named 31 worked for banks because you can afford to buy one of everything. There were people who I asked who came to me and said, oh, that would never happen. You'd never walk into an enterprise and they've not done security before and you have to decide what to buy. That's exactly what happened to me when I started as the CISO of the Texas Education Agency. It was my first day on the job. I was the only security person, and I walked in and they said, we need your budget request by the end of the day today. So I requested $2,000. I asked for a logging server and a couple of books. And the person I was reporting to scribbled it out and said, where do you think you are, the private sector? So I had 0 budget and 0 people when I started doing security there. This is exactly what is still happening. But they're not going to come on this stage and tell you that. Of course they're not. But when I give this talk, usually somebody comes up to me afterwards and says, yes, that's us, don't tell anybody. This is a big, big problem. They are below what I call the security poverty line. And if you are asking yourself why organizations can't protect themselves, it's not that they're stupid or lazy or malicious or anything like that. First of all, budget is a problem because if you have very little budget, a lot of these tools are very expensive. They can't afford them. Another thing that they need, though, is expertise. And expertise is not just training. That's the second thing that security vendors always say, oh, we'll give you free training on our tool. That's not going to help. Because not only do you need the skills to use those tools, you need the experience to know what to do with something you've never seen before. Because, let's face it, this is what we do in security every day. We go, wow, that just happened. Okay, now what do we do? So you have to make this up really fast. And so anybody with that sort of expertise, with the skills and the experience, how much do you think they make? What do you think their salaries are? It certainly cannot be afforded by a dentist's office. Usually, if you're trying to hire those people, you are competing with the security vendors to get those people, which means if you can't get them, then you have to hire the security vendor to take care of these things because they're the only ones who have the expertise for this. Even if you have the expertise and you know what you need to do for security, can you actually do it? Do you have the capability to do it? That is a problem because there are lots of constraints in different organizations that keep you from doing those things. There's a lot of conventional wisdom in security that says, for example, you should have segregation of duties. You should put different applications on different servers or in different instances or whatever. If you're working in the public sector, though, you're trying to be a good steward of taxpayer money, which means you're going to use your servers as much as you can until they fall over. And only then will you get something new. That's, again, why we have really old equipment out there. You're going to pile all the applications onto the same server, use as few of them as you can, save that money, and so on. Another conventional wisdom thing is that authentication systems should fail closed. In healthcare, that's not going to work. You cannot fail closed. You cannot keep the doctor from their patient data. As a doctor once said, I do not want my patient dying on the gurney with his privacy intact. So there are much more important things than these security principles. They just can't do it. If you're not running your own network, you can't put a firewall in. So there are so many different constraints out there in aviation. You cannot fail fast. Fail fast is not a good idea in aviation. There was one CISO of American Airlines, Dan Glass, who gave a really good public talk about security, airline security in aviation, and he described what it took to patch a system there. I don't know if this is still the case, but it was the case that you had to have one person at the front of the plane, one person at the back of the plane, and one person on the tarmac to do a patch, which meant that you could not be doing it in the air. I'm sorry if you've heard stories about, oh, I hacked the system while I was sitting in seat 23A. I'm sorry, that didn't happen. It could not happen. I had CISOs coming to me and saying, no, that wouldn't have happened, but we can't say anything about it. So all of those capability problems are an issue. And then finally, influence. If you cannot get your supplier to patch something for you, you're kind of stuck. I would go to these small organizations who did software for me and say, I need you to patch this, and they would go, well, you're the only person to ask for this, so no, we're not going to patch for it. Or they'll say, we'll patch it if you pay us to patch it. So if you're a very large organization like an airline and you say to your supplier, we need you to patch this, of course they will. But if you're a smaller organization, you can't, which is why it's so important for a lot of small organizations to come together and get that collective bargaining power with their suppliers to do the security fixes that we know need to be done. And the other question is, why are we making this an individual responsibility? Especially in the US, we have this silly idea that everybody should do everything themselves, and if you are not successful, it just means that you didn't work hard enough. It's a very silly belief, but what can I say? But luckily, in the last National Cybersecurity Strategy that came out in 2023 from the White House, they acknowledged that this is probably not doable to expect all organizations to secure themselves. They wanted to transfer a lot of the burden of securing things onto organizations that could afford it. And again, in the United States, we really don't trust our government, and can you blame us? Especially right now. If you can't trust your government, there's a lot of things you cannot do. If you look at Estonia, they have managed to do a lot of things because they trust their government. They can do nationally driven infrastructure that works much better in security instead of expecting everyone to do it themselves and reinvent it every single time. So what can we do differently? I am really much more interested in how things work, whether things work. For 3 years, I worked together with the Scientia Institute. It was formed by some of the people who started the Verizon Data Breach Investigations Report. Really great people. We did some research into what actually appears to work in security. And it's very hard to do. Sometimes you'll have a lab that tests whether a product actually blocks something that it claims it's going to block. But that's a very narrowly scoped use case. That's hard to do. I want to find out, what does somebody have to buy in order to secure themselves? What processes do they need to have? So we came out with a security outcome study, and we did this 3 years in a row, looking at what practices appeared to produce the outcomes that we were most interested in as CISOs. And there were things like what tends to make for better incident response capabilities. And one of them, for example, was role-based training and awareness. If you taught somebody, this is what a breach is going to look like from your perspective, this is the kind of decision we're going to be asking you to make, this is what we need you to report to us, this is what you might be called upon to do, and do that for all the different roles in your enterprise, that works a lot better than just having them sit for half an hour in front of a video and click on checkboxes. We have to build better incentives, economic incentives, cultural incentives, political incentives to do better in security. And you're going to hate this one too, especially if you're a developer. Today, we don't have a manufacturing model of software development. We have a literary model where everyone wants to do it their own way. They want to make it a work of art. They want to reinvent things. And yes, we already say, do not roll your own crypto. But we need to say that for a lot of things. And for critical use cases, we might need to say, I'm sorry, we have a few types of software that we know work well for this. You're not allowed to use anything else. I don't care if you want to innovate. It's too bad. You have to use this because this is just too important. So if you want to do innovation, you've got to do it somewhere else. We have to stop blaming the victims. We really, really have to do that. And we have to democratize security. So another thing we have to do is get rid of the metrics that we're using today. We tend to come up with security metrics because they're easier to count. Everybody loves numbers. I had a head of equities training who came to me and said, if I plug this in, how much more insecure are we going to be? And I said, I don't know, 5. You know, there are some things you cannot put a number to. You know, you can't use ordinal numbers and then multiply them for metrics like impact times probability equals risk. As my friend Alex Hutton used to describe it, that's like saying peanut butter times jet engine equals shiny. Don't try to multiply ordinal numbers to get some sort of risk score. Just because it's a number doesn't mean it's reliable or it's accurate. So, you know, vulnerability counts, you've got 10,000 vulnerabilities here. We don't know how many of those really matter. Some of them make it into the KEV database, known exploited vulnerabilities, but a lot of them don't. There's a large percentage of exploited vulnerabilities that don't make it into a database. Insurance providers will sometimes give talks about, well, we see this practice and we see who files insurance claims, so we can kind of infer that they tend to have fewer breaches. No, that's not the answer. They may just not be filing claims because they don't want to report anything. So we don't know what actually results in a breach. We don't know how many people have a breach but are not forced to report it, and not how much you spend. Please don't talk about, you know, spending more money on security means your security's better. No, it really doesn't. There are some metrics that some people are trying to develop, like Jay Healy at Columbia University, trying to figure out, as defenders, are we winning? Just that. Are we winning this fight? And so he has some really great papers out there. If you just Google him and metrics, you'll find his papers. Here's an example of a set of metrics. This is from a talk he gave at Black Hat. This is just one slide. He has a whole bunch of other metrics that might be useful. But if you look at this, if you look at the threat indicators, if we were successfully disrupting adversaries, what would we expect to see? And you might see some things that can be counted. Yes, you know, a number of TTPs or how many harder TTPs you would be seeing. You can count those. Okay, those might be numbers that you could possibly use. But some things like, let's see, frequent retooling of their infrastructure. If we are seeing them so fast that they have to keep rebuilding their infrastructure. If there are smaller groups driven out of business, If there's degraded trust between groups, you can't put a number on that, but that could be very useful, trying to understand who's working together as a threat actor and who stops working together because we're more successful at defending against them. If it's hard for them to find new talent, if they can't recruit, that's an indicator that we're succeeding in defending. So think about things like this, and he does acknowledge that not all of these it can work that well by themselves, but if you put them together, if you take a lot of these and group them, they may have better meaning of whether we're doing better, whether we're succeeding. So think about these things. If we were going to succeed, how could we tell? How would we know? So we really need to build better incentives. This is one of the things that the committee came out with in its report describing what sort of things we need to incentivize. And it might be through regulation, it might be through legislation, or it might not be if we simply kind of rejigger which way things flow and who's doing what, and what people are selling and what people are buying. And mitigate the externalities where even if you have a breach, the ripple effects may affect organizations that have never even heard of you. I don't know if anybody here has heard of the Blackbaud ransomware event that happened a few years ago. This was a platform for some healthcare and a lot of nonprofits. And when they had their ransomware attack, Scientia in their research found that it affected 1,000 other organizations. And what's worse, they found that a quarter of those who were affected ended up having to pay their breach costs, even though it wasn't their breach. So this is the sort of thing that we need to think about, and this is the kind of social engineering that I think is a lot harder. You know, sure, it's pretty easy to get 1,000 people to click on a link. But if you can get 1,000 people to stop clicking on a link, then you're really accomplishing something. Or even more, if you are incentivizing a society to reduce that risk so that it doesn't matter if they click on a link, that's even harder social engineering. Being a CISO involves the hardest social engineering I know of, unless you are trying to do it not just for an organization, but across a demographic, across a sector, or nationally, or internationally. If you're trying to do something and make something happen across the EU, that's really hard social engineering. So if you are up for a challenge, please go into that, because we really need more security people working at that level. So you have to stop blaming the victims, because one way or another it does come down to bad design. It is a very bad design. I was standing in my bathroom today at the Novotel, and they had the makeup mirror way up here where I could barely reach it, and you could tilt the mirror down a little bit, which is okay, except that when I'm doing my eye makeup, I can't see the mirror. You know, this is like the worst design of a bathroom for short women, short, nearsighted women. This was so bad. We want to democratize security. First of all, security used to be seen as a control function. You would tell everybody what to do and they had to do it, especially in high discipline environments like the military or like financial institutions. You know, if it was a security issue, you got to make the rules. That's not the case anymore. And everybody should learn how security can serve them, because that's what security should be. It should be a service function. Now, I don't use parental controls on my kids' equipment, on their devices, but one time my teenager came to me and she said, "Can you help me turn on the parental controls for my phone?" And I said, "Honey, why?" And it's because she wanted to set it up to enforce her own study time so that she could not use the social media apps when she was supposed to be studying. And I said, "Great, okay, you set it up the way you want it, and then I'll put a password on it that you don't know, and anytime you want to change it, come back to me, and We'll change it to the way you want it to be. So she learned how the security served her, not the way I would have wanted it as her parent, but the way that worked for her. And I hate to say this, but the age of wizardry is over. We cannot distinguish ourselves as technical people from the muggles. Oh, the muggles don't understand. No, they shouldn't have to understand. They should be able to use and operate security in a way that works for them. And it shouldn't be an esoteric thing that, we're the only ones who know and you have to have 15 years of education to understand. We have to design it better than that. And then finally, I'm going to argue that there is no talent shortage in security. There are just bad job requirements. I believe that anybody you are talking to, anybody you're sitting next to on the bus, if you ask them their opinion on some sort of concept that has to do with securing something, they will understand it. You don't have to go into the equipment or the software or the tooling or esoteric concepts. You can just say, do you think this would be risky to do? And they will be able to understand that. I have hired a number of people who have no security background, no technical background, and they did wonderfully. They did really, really well. So I will argue that there are many more people out there who can contribute to security that we are overlooking because we have a very narrow expectation of the background that somebody should have. Again, if you want to fight, we'll go outside. What you can do is question all of the assumptions. If we find that we've been trying something over and over again for years, maybe it's time to ask ourselves whether we should still be trying that. What's that definition of insanity again? Doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result? It's time for us to look at what we're doing over and over again and go, yeah, can we do something different now? We need to share the knowledge and the responsibility, not just, document things and go, oh, this is intuitively obvious. You could say that 20, 30, 40 years ago because it was such a small community, everybody had the same background. You could say something was intuitively obvious and it would be true, but you can't do that anymore. We all come from different backgrounds. And you need to promote leadership, not just hire people from different areas, but give them a chance to lead. If you're in a meeting, and you don't have to be a manager to do this, if you're in a meeting and you're all discussing different ideas, you should pick somebody in the group and go, yeah, let's try Wendy's idea. Let's see how that works. Okay, Wendy, you're responsible for making sure we do it the way that you thought it should happen. Give them a chance to lead because you're not going to be a manager or you're not going to be a senior individual contributor if you don't get a chance to lead and promote your ideas in some of these areas. It shouldn't just be whoever gets picked to be the next manager. Everybody should have a chance to lead on this because you never know what people are going to come up with. And finally, you should stop listening to me. Because I'm a boomer, I might have created some of the problems that you have to solve now, so I'm really sorry. But I might not be the right person to fix it, so it's going to be on you. I'm really sorry about that, but that's how it goes. All right, so yeah, stop listening to me. I want to hear your ideas now. And I want to hear questions, I want to hear comments, whatever we have. Elise, who is going to be running the mic in here, and I believe that there is a mic over in the streaming room. So if there's anybody who wants to say something, let me ask the streaming room first, but if you want to say something, raise your hand and Elise will throw you the microphone in that foam-covered square, that cube. Anybody want to argue? Come on. I'll put the hammer away. I promise.
No questions from the streaming room.
No questions from the streaming room. Okay, we have a question here. And
All right. Thanks for the talk. My question is, you said there is... Stop pausing the equipment. I broke it.
or you can yell really loudly and I'll repeat it.
Is it working now? No.
Yeah, don't throw that mic, Elise.
All right, let's try that. Okay. So, thanks for the talk. You said problem one is there used to be more academic problems. Now there's more like software problems, and we solve this with even more software and even more plastering of yet another layer. And then you said, so what we're trying to do is give new incentives and try to solve things differently. So wouldn't be the more obvious thing to do, like make it an academic problem? If you say it's a good idea to, if you click on the link or not, doesn't matter, doesn't hurt. So why don't we try to make this an academic problem? How can we solve this instead of trying to find an incentive for users or companies to click or not to click?
That's a really good question. So the question is, if we want to solve a problem using incentives, why don't we make it an academic problem instead of trying to get organizations and people to solve it? Well, first of all, if you make it an academic problem, there's a much smaller group of people who are going to try to attack it, and that's academics. People at universities will work on it, sure, but that's not... if you want to get Google to come on board to solve this problem, you're going to have to think a lot bigger, and you're going to have to make an incentive that they want to solve. And some of it might be putting more money into research, and it could be an academic research issue. It could also be a private sector one. It could be a private-public partnership that tries to solve it. Listing it as part of this report is only the first step. The next is going to policymakers and saying, what kind of incentives can we put out there to actually get people to do it? Because right now, nobody's really interested in solving it, or if they are, it's a very theoretical problem. It's like a PNP problem. What are you going to get if you solve this? It's not in the same way as, for example, GDPR. GDPR had such a huge effect, both inside of Europe and also in the States, and one of the effects that it had is everybody had to inventory their data where they never did have to before. They needed to know what they were keeping and why they were keeping it and could they get rid of it. So that's the kind of really powerful widespread incentive you want to be able to do.
If I may ask, to continue question, because you're in a good base for having the root of the problem. You're with one password, right? And so we yesterday had to talk about password managers, and they all have the same problem. If you can see the password, I as an attacker can see the password. Mm-hmm. That's one easy to understand problem. And if the question is allowed, if I'm a CISO and I want to buy a password manager solution, which one should I buy? Should I want password or KeyPass or whatever? They all got different features, all got the same problem. So this is one small bit of the same problem. Why don't we make an academic problem out of this? How do we prevent, if you can see the password, I as an attacker can see the password? How do we solve this academic problem?
Yeah, actually, with 1Password, the user does not have to see the password. It doesn't ever have to be in clear text. But we can talk about that later. Yeah, but it is one of those problems that if you have an issue in a product and it's widespread, how do we get everyone to solve it? Everyone who has that problem in different offerings that they're making available. How do we do it across the industry and incentivize? Unfortunately, sometimes it's compliance, because your management may agree with you on the impact of something, but they won't agree on the probability. They will say, yes, if this did happen, we would lose $11 billion in federal funding, but we just don't think it's going to happen. They won't agree on the probability, unless it has to do with compliance, because they may not believe in the hacker, but they do believe in the auditor. They've seen the auditor. They've sat in the conference room with the auditor. They believe in the auditor. So yes, compliance is often a better hammer to incentivize these problems than just what you think the probability is of an actual attack. Okay, let me go back to the streaming room and see if there's anybody there who wants to ask anything. Okay, we'll ask someone here.
Hello, nice talk and nice lat hammer. I also own one by myself.
Ah, good.
So I like to argue or discuss with you about the point of making KPIs for cybersecurity. And in my opinion, I think we should make or we need to make KPIs because we have to get the money from the money guys. Yeah. So we have to show them numbers which tell them, hey, cybersecurity or money you spend in cybersecurity gives you value. It gives value for the company. And I think the easiest way is to do it by numbers.
Okay, so the comment was that we really do need KPIs as security people to show to the money guys because they won't pay us without the money guys.
Yeah, the right one. Eh?
Yeah.
So they have to show up that it's valuable for the company.
We do have to show that it's valuable. There are some people who believe in return on security investment. I don't believe in it. I believe that security is for loss avoidance, not for getting return on investment. But again, we can argue about that. Some things do not, in some cases, security may offer a return on investment, for example, if it opens a market for you. If you get FedRAMP compliance and can prove it, then you can start selling to the federal government in the US and you can make a lot more money. Okay, I'll argue
or
you can make...
your company is more worse, or you have to pay less insurance because you have a higher cybersecurity level, or you get cheaper loans.
Yes, you could get cheaper loans. Maybe you can lower your premium to a certain extent if the insurance company allows you to do that. But it's all in the terms of what the person paying you the money insists on, and it's usually the measurement, the KPI that they understand. So the money people want to see money back. The insurance people want to see better actuarial data. They want to see certain practices. And again, and I've talked with insurance people, they don't have the actuarial data yet to be able to see whether asking for certain practices actually is going to reduce their costs and therefore your premiums. We don't really understand those yet. But yes, for some of these things, a number is important, and you have to promote things in the number that the money person understands and appreciates. Again, when that head of trading came to me and wanted a number, I did a little Excel spreadsheet with a chart for him, and I made up some numbers, and I said, here's, our risk is going to go up more if you plug this in. And he was happy. The numbers didn't mean anything, but they were numbers, and he was happy.
Yeah, it's a number of awareness trainings. Yeah, it's worthless, a worthless number.
Yeah, I don't know, except I do know that for the Society of Information Risk Analysts, for example, they have a number of mailing lists. They've been arguing about these metrics for decades, literally decades. Nobody can agree on what the numbers should be. We are still trying to research what numbers we can get that are both collectible and useful. Because usually if they're collectible, they're not useful. And if they're useful, we can't figure out how to collect them. So there's your academic problem, to still work out what are measurable KPIs that both security professionals and the finance professionals are going to agree on.
Hi, Wendy. Thanks for your talk. Something you said is like the government, we trust the government in Estonia, so therefore they could do more. When you look at the industry, like one had a good talk and said security should be like my mother doing groceries, right? You go to the grocery store, you buy food, you know you can eat it, you will not die by the food. IT is, we want to be not regulated, right? The internet should be open. On the other side, can we as industry solve this problem, or do we need regulators as GDPR to make us responsible to solve it? Because when you know everything is left free, people chose money before limitation. Like the car industry became more secure because regulations. Food industry is highly regulated because we see all these things happening pervert to making food less healthy. So is it something like regulator can do more to make people more responsible on what they deliver?
Yeah, can regulators do more to force better security? That's a good question. I mean, compliance tends to be an effort to manage a well-understood, very tightly scoped risk across a population. So if you look at PCI DSS, they're trying to manage the risk associated with a string of a credit card number that we understand very well. We understand where it's going to be used. There are not that many different use cases for it. And we understand the flow, where that string goes. We know what needs to be secured all along that flow path. So yes, you can create a very prescriptive list of what you need to do to secure it. And it's great. You know when you're done. You don't have to keep buying new stuff over and over and over again in order to manage that risk. The problem comes when you're trying to manage a risk that's less well-defined, that's very widely scoped across a population, whether it's across a sector or across a nation or something like that. There's so many edge cases, and there's such a wide distribution of risk depending on how you're using that sort of thing, that it becomes very hard to just say, okay, here's the list that you need, this is all you need, when you do it, you're done. So either we have to slice compliance into much thinner slices to be able to be more prescriptive and precise about them, or we have to come up with a different way of incentivizing, security that's not necessarily compliance. So, for regulation for the EU, I don't know. I would love to hear your opinions on what sort of scalpels can we use to slice these things off, to make good and useful regulation that doesn't punish, certain groups unnecessarily. Okay. Anything else? One more call for the streaming room. Let me see what time it is. Okay. It's almost time to finish. All right. Thank you very much. Looking forward to seeing you for the rest of the day. Enjoy the conference. Thank you for coming.